こんにちは。私はブラウン・スティーブン。よーし。インクサイクロペディア行きます。今日、紫式部の色しずくです。サンプルです。ロベルトのサンプルです。どうもありがとう、ロベルト。さよなら。
Alright, here we go with Iroshizuku Murasaki Shikibu. Start with a bit of fine writing. The quick samurai was cut by a quicker one. You see, it's a fairly light purple, but that's really because that nib is not particularly saturated. If you put it into a somewhat more saturated nib, it is this one. You see, it's a somewhat darker purple. Then we go on to a very saturated, wet, broad nib. And finally, an italic nib. Actually, it's not finally because I'm going to do flex after this. Alright. Flex. Everybody is anxiously awaiting this pen to fail again. And there we go. We really have to go very slow. But flow seems to be pretty good. Alright. So what we have is here, just taking a sip of tea there. What we have is here is a very interesting purple. And I think you can see here that it go. You know what? I'll just do a quick first pass so that can dry while I'm talking. I find this to be an interesting purple. As you can see, the color it actually turns out to have, I'm not sure how well the camera picks it up, but it's quite clear from my perspective that the saturation of the nib really matters for this ink. in a somewhat dry pen it's going to be a very light purple, but in a very wet pen it's really going to be much darker, and there's quite some shading there. It's not an excessively shading ink, I would say, but it's a very interesting purple color. Alright, how are we doing here? Dries pretty quickly, which means we can do a second pass. Come back for a third later. But for now, I think we should start to work on some tests. So maybe we can start with doing some fat writing. M for Murasaki. Do a bit of regular writing right there. And how are we doing here? Looks good to me. Third pass. And then I think we're going to need some water to do some testing. So we will start with the bastard brush. Closely followed by the eyedropper of death. Which is dry. And while that is, while that's drying, we may as well have a short look at the three passes test. So what you see here is again an ink going from a very light purple to a much darker and saturated purple color. I think it's a very fascinating and interesting ink. And now I'm going to prepare myself for yet another test, because of course it is time for the Brown benchmark, which today is a little bit restrained, but that is just too bad, because it is the way it is. Then we have the Tardif test. Alright. I think it's time to get rid of some of that excess water. And then we can have a look at making a scorecard for the ink. And after I've done that, I'll talk you through the test's results. Alright, so first of all we have cleaning. I'll give that 2 out of 3. It's 1 being the best score. I found it okay to clean this pen out of an ink. It's not the easiest, it's not the hardest, so it's just a sort of middle score. Bleed through is something we'll have to assess later. We have colour. Well, that would be a purple, I suppose. We have shading, which I would say is fairly good, but it is not excessive. You have some nice shading there, But I have seen better. Although I like this, I have seen better. So for shading, I'm going to give this a 2, a 2, 2, 2, to mark that. We have flow. Well, flow, as with many of the, well, I can't say many of the Iroshizuku inks because I haven't used many, but I have used, this is my third, and flow, no, my fourth, sorry, and up to this point, flow is really good, so I'm giving that full marks. It's a very, for some reason I always get the feeling these Iroshizuku inks are excessively thin, and that gives them a very good flow, except when you're trying to do flex writing with them. But as you saw, even that seemed to work out here, so that seems to be alright. Feathering is something we'll do later, when we've had a look at the other sheet of paper. Drying time seems to be pretty good. It's a fairly fast dryer. I'm willing to give that full marks. Even on this Rhodia paper it dries fairly quickly, even from very wet nibs. Then there is waterproofness. That's something we can assess now. Looking at the tests. The writing suffers significantly from water. You can see a bit of writing which is still left there, so it's not terrible. Same goes here. You can still see bits of it, but it's not the lowest score. It's something in the middle, I would say. A 2. Alright. Tests. Again, that nice shading from a lighter to a darker purple, it's fairly clear there too. You got the very light bits and you have the very dark bits. And you know what, that's pretty much all there's to it. So I think we're going to switch papers now. Papers, there we go. So what we have here is some simple copier paper. And we're going to go through all the motions yet again. Fine. I'm not absolutely certain about that myself, but I talked to the professor and he said that it's absolutely the case that she was quite attractive. In fact, he remembers once having a state dinner where she was present, and he said she was quite a spectacular sight. All the men apparently were not really paying attention to what they were eating, I understand. So, you know. Broad nibbage. And, whoops, and italic. And now the moment I've been dreading, flex writing on cheap paper. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to make sure there is some ink primed in the feed before I start. Ooby KB, flex. Look at that. That's a lot of ink. She was hot. Alright. And then finally, we should have a look at a 6mm nib writing lady. This is a somewhat lame L, but that doesn't matter. Alright, so we've got that covered. Now what we need to check is a couple of things. First of all, what about feathering? Well, I didn't see a whole lot of feathering in the normal writing. I don't know about you. I didn't see anything there. Nothing in the West Broad. Nothing in the italic script. But I do see feathering in the flex writing. You see that? There's absolute feathering going on there. The very fat writing, as long as it's normal writing, I don't see any feathering. But once we get to, again, laying down a lot of ink, the feathering starts. So, interesting. How about bleed through? A lot of bleed through with the flex writing, but with the normal writing, not so much, which is interesting. I have seen no feathering on the Rhodia paper. Bleed through, that's the brown benchmark. Nothing else. Looks good to me. So, I think we can finish up our scorecard. Bleed through. I'm going to give that a 2 because it does bleed through with flex writing, but yeah, you know what? I'm going to give that a 1. It's so, I mean, that's really excessive to do flex writing on that type of paper. I mean, in the normal writing there's no bleed through apart from a little bit here and there. That's a broad nib. I think it's a very good performance actually. Feathering, again, seems to be very controlled, except when you really lay down a lot of ink on not so terrific paper. Alright, so it's a 1-2, how about that? So inkage is 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Then the final thing I'd like to do is give you a comparison ink. And that comparison ink is going to be in Italian ink. So we'll start with this. This is Iroshizuku Murasaki Shikibu, which has some flexy aspects. This is about the color. And then for the comparison ink, we're going to have a look at Visconti Purple, which looks like that. And if you ask me, that is a highly comparable purple. So, I hope this was useful. We've covered Iroshizuku Murasaki Shikibu, and I'll see you later.